A few months back, I released a video on my top 10 anime, and if you haven't watched that video, you should check it out. But if you have seen it, you would know that I'm a huge fan of romance and ecchi titles. But there was one show that made it all the way to number 2 that wasn't like anything else on the list before it. And that show is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. One of the few shonens that I will sing the highest praises for. I love JoJo's because it's wacky characters, it's over-the-top fight scenes, and the overall bizarre nature of the show. All of these things combine to create a very unique experience that I cannot look away from. So, let's take a look at one of my favorite anime of all time. However, JoJo's does have 9 total parts, so we're just going to be taking a look at the first one today, but trust me, I will be talking about the other ones in the future. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is written and illustrated by the immortal Hirohiko Araki. It was first published in Shueisha's weekly Shonen Jump magazine starting in 1987. JoJo's is still ongoing to this day, however, in 2005 it was moved to the monthly magazine Ultra Jump. The part we're discussing today, part 1, ran from 1987 to 1988. Now, JoJo's is a long-running series, however, it just started getting popular in the West within the last decade. Why did it take so long to catch on here? Well, we're going to put a pin in that for now because it will be easier to explain after I start talking about the characters and the plot. Part 1, or Phantom Blood, follows our protagonist Jonathan Joestar. Jonathan, Joestar, Joe. This is our JoJo. Jonathan is a noble living in 1889 England. He lives in a huge mansion with his father and many servants. But what about Jonathan's mother? Well, when Jonathan was still a baby, his parents' carriage got into a crash and Jonathan's mother tragically died protecting Jonathan. Jonathan's dad, George Joestar, Joe, this is not our JoJo, was close to death outside of the carriage until a man and his wife happened upon the carriage attempting to loot it. As the man, who is named Dario Brando, steals George's ring, George wakes up and mistakes Dario's actions for salvation rather than stealing. Dario quickly capitalizes on this, pretending that his intentions all along were to save this man in the hopes that George will owe him a favor. Thanks to Dario, George is able to raise his son Jonathan into a fine young lad. He plays around with his dog Danny, gets to eat well, and even meets a young girl named Arena. Arena was being picked on by some boys one day, and when she was about to be in tears, Jonathan steps in and saves her. Jonathan is a true gentleman, which is why I love him. He is a pure and true hero. But what's the point of a really righteous and wholesome hero without a despicably evil villain? And that villain is Dario, the man who saved George Joestar, also had a son by the name of Dio. Dio is very much a counterpart to Jonathan. Dio's family is poor, he gets yelled at by his father, and even beat on by other people. But that is all going to change because Dario is on his deathbed, and he instructs Dio to take a letter to the Joestar estate so that George will raise Dio as his own son. Dio arrives at the Joestar mansion and is met by Jonathan and his dog Danny, the latter of which Dio instantly kicks. Dio wastes no time telling Jonathan to stay out of his way, putting the two at odds from the start. Dio is an excellent foil for Jonathan, the wicked adoptive brother who comes from poverty hoping to take him down, makes a lot of sense and is very grounded. Dio's motivations might be simple, but Araki keeps things interesting by making Dio well-written and making all of his actions over the top. Dio is set on ruining Jonathan's life, not just at home by upstaging Jonathan in front of their father, but also in front of the other children as well. Dio beats Jonathan in boxing and then proceeds to tell everyone that Jonathan is a liar, which makes everyone alienate him. So now JoJo thinks he is a loner. But remember that girl he helped from earlier? Well, she's back. And soon they become good friends. But Dio can't have that now, can he? Dio confronts Arena and forces a kiss on her, declaring a line that will go down in meme history. I don't know if it's because it's a meme, but the Kono Diodam moment always gets me hype. What I do know is that the line is delivered exceptionally well because of the voice actor, Takahito Koyasu. The man is a legend, and I can pick his voice out in an instant. He plays Dio, as well as every character he voices, perfectly. After that show of force, Arena avoids Jonathan, and he knows exactly who must be responsible. Jonathan and Dio have an all-out brawl in the foyer of the Joestar mansion. The fight gets so intense that blood flies onto the mysterious stone mask on the wall. The mask belonged to Jonathan's mother, and she had it in her possession the night of the crash when she died. When the blood hits the mask reacts with spikes popping out the back. Jonathan managed to get the upper hand in his scuffle with Dio, so Dio gets a little revenge. Dio takes Danny and throws him in the outside furnace, alive. Araki loves to give you reasons as to why a character is a good guy or a bad guy. An example of this is Jonathan helping out Arena, and a few examples we'll talk about later. However, to show why Dio's a bad guy, he has him murder a dog. Which, I understand can be a turnoff for a lot of viewers, but don't worry guys, I'm sure that's the last time he's gonna visit that well. After that, things were pretty uneventful for the boys. But when Jonathan and Dio were close to graduating, George Joestar fell ill. Tragic. Both Dio's real father and adoptive father both got deathly ill in a similar way. Hey, wait a minute! Dio was poisoning George just like he did with Dario all those years ago. And Jonathan finds out by discovering the letter that Dario wrote to George. So, Jonathan sets out to find the cure and evidence of Dio's plot. Jonathan travels to Ogre Street, a dangerous backstreet in London, to find the source of the Chinese poison Dio is using. While Jonathan is away, Dio takes to the bottle just like his old man did. But Dio still has tricks up his sleeve, the stone mask that reacts to blood all those years ago. Dio believes that if he smears the mask in Jonathan's blood and puts it on Jonathan, the spikes that protrude will pop out and puncture Jonathan's brain. And while Dio is out drinking, he tests the mask on a random man on the street. But instead of the man dying, he became something else. The stone mask turned the man into a vampire. Dio tried everything he could to kill the monster, but the man was nigh invincible. And as Dio was about to be killed by his own creation, he wondered if the sun would be the last thing he ever saw as night became day. But as we all know, vampires are weak to sunlight, so as the vampire dies, Dio gets a new idea of how to take on Jonathan. Dio returns to the Joestar estate and is greeted by Jonathan. Jonathan reveals to Dio that he knows the truth, and Dio tries to get sympathy from Jonathan, pulling from their history of growing up together. But before Jonathan could give Dio any sympathy, a man interrupts from the shadows. Jonathan met this man in Ogre Street, and although this man tried to kill Jonathan with the help of his gang, Jonathan still spared his life. Jonathan is a true gentleman, and this man respects true gentlemen. But he despises evil, and he recognizes it in Dio. This character is great, and if you have any problems with him, you can take it on the run. But just who is this mysterious man?
Right about now, you're probably wondering who I am. Allow me to elucidate ya. The name is Robert E.O. Speedwagon.
When I first heard this line, I died laughing. This motherfucker's name is Robert E.O. Speedwagon. But this does bring up an interesting point about JoJo's. See, REO Speedwagon is the name of a rock band from the 70s and 80s, and heck, even Dio is the name of a heavy metal band, also from the 80s. This isn't a coincidence either, because Araki is actually a huge fan of Western music. Western music, of course, meaning music from Europe and America. So, Araki puts a lot of musical references all throughout JoJo's, specifically naming characters after bands and songs. These references are great and are actually deeper than just being surface level. Plus, if you are a fan of a band being referenced, you will feel proud knowing that one of your favorites was mentioned in JoJo's. But if you don't know what band is being referenced, after you read the chapter or watch the show, you can listen and be introduced to some nice classic rock. The music references are super important to JoJo's, and it wouldn't be the same without it. However, remember when I said that JoJo's just got popular in the West within the past decade, despite being created in the late 80s? Well, JoJo's Part 1 did not get a proper anime adaptation until 2012. And part of the reason is these musical references. See, Japanese copyright law is a lot different than it is in America, so you can get away with all these references in Japan, but not really in America. So these names are changed in localization. This is just one of the reasons why the show didn't get popular or get made at all, but there are others, but we'll talk about those later. Anyway, Speedwagon stops Dio from tricking Jonathan, and just before the police can arrest him, Dio places the stone mask on his face, rejecting his humanity, and as he does, he stabs at Jonathan to use his blood to unlock the mask's power. However, Dio's attack does not connect with Jonathan, but with George Joestar, the man who raised him. George's death hits hard. And the thing I appreciate the most about it is what it tells us about his character. See, as George dies, he blames Dio's actions on himself, which is honorable and fits perfectly with a flashback that we see. See, George knew the whole time that Dario wasn't his savior. However, he still raises Dio as his own son. George is also a true gentleman, just like Jonathan, and George's character shows us the kind of man that Jonathan can grow up to be and will become. After stabbing his adopted father, Dio is shot by the cops who are there to arrest him. But as we know, that is not enough to stop what the stone mask has created. Dio turning into a vampire and going on a tear, murdering the cops that are there to arrest him, is surprisingly gory, but this shows just what Dio is capable of. Dio is definitely a powerful foe, but Jonathan has proven that he will not quit, even when odds are against him. So Jonathan protects his father's body, grabs a spear from a suit of armor, and takes on Dio head on. Now, I'm not a big shonen guy because I don't really love fight scenes that much. Fights to me are just a way to get from point A to point B. I much would rather prefer a good story over a really well done fight scene. However, the fights in JoJo's are different. They're like puzzles, so the characters have to outthink their opponent, which I am totally down for. Jonathan sets fire to the mansion, hoping that the fire can burn Dio faster than he can heal himself. Jonathan quickly ascends the stairs to escape the flames, and Dio pursues by walking up the wall. Dio and Jonathan meet, and Dio attempts to throw Jonathan into the flames, declaring, "Get back, JoJo!" But as the two fall, Jonathan takes Dio and impales him on the angel statue in the middle of the room. This fight is amazing. It is exciting and phenomenal to watch. And, like all the fights in Part 1, it is accented by Jonathan's theme. Jonathan's theme is this really beautiful, heroic, orchestral piece. And whenever I hear it, I am so hyped to see Jonathan win the day, which is a mark of a good main JoJo theme. And it doesn't just end with Jonathan's theme. The opening sequence to the show is really good as well. The visuals are stunning. It is the first 3 episodes of the show, which we just talked about, told through CG animation. But that's just the opening sequence. How's the OP? Sono Chino Sarame JoJo! This OP is one of my favorite OPs of all time. It is so energetic, and it gets me in the mood to watch the anime so much. And while we're here, how's the ED? JoJo's actually does something really interesting with the EDs. As I said earlier, Araki is a huge fan of Western music, So he will use some of these songs as the EDs. So a lot of these songs you will have heard of before. And for part 1, he chooses... The first fight between Jonathan and Dio is fantastic. However, this is just the beginning. The series is about to get a whole lot bigger. But maybe not as good as the first 3 episodes. Let's talk about it. After his confrontation with Dio, Jonathan was left severely burned, but good thing Irina is here to tend to his wounds. Jonathan's relationship with Irina is really cute and surprisingly unique. Love interests do appear in JoJo's later on, but this is the biggest attempt by far, and it actually makes part 1 stand out among the rest. And I'm glad that Araki's biggest attempt at a romance was actually his best. When Jonathan is able to leave his bed, he meets a fun new character named Baron Zeppeli. Zeppeli is a master of the martial art Hamon, and he wants to teach it to Jonathan because, surprise, Dio isn't dead. Hopefully that's the last time I'll have to say those words. Anyway, Zeppeli knows all about the stone masks because he had an encounter with them that killed his father. So Zeppeli spent his life learning Hamon, a martial art that can allow a human to channel the power of the sun through breathing. Zeppeli is a perfect example of what is known as a Jobro. He has a cool hat, he is a goofball who did something weird when he first met Jonathan, i.e. put a pinky in his stomach and destroy a rock through a frog. Also, he speaks English sometimes.
Hey, baby!
It has been a week and Jonathan is ready to take on Dio. Again. So the trio of him, Zeppeli, and Speedwagon set out to London. But when they arrive, they are attacked by who else but Jack the Ripper.
Surprise, motherfucker!
JoJo's is what I would describe as historical fiction. The setting is very important to the plot. So, Jack the Ripper being one of Dio's henchmen fits really well. Same with Dio being a vampire. It gives the whole part this very gothic feel.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
Jack is defeated and the team heads to Wind and Schlatt, where they meet a little boy. His name is Poco, and like the band he is named after, is very forgettable. Araki likes putting kid characters in JoJo's for some reason. However, they are rarely ever that important. In fact, a lot of people hate Poco, which I don't really get. Sure, he does one thing that's important to the story, so he's not that crucial, but he doesn't detract from the story either. I think people are way too hard on Poco overall, and I think they better think twice about their perception of him. While in Wind and Schlatt, the sun sets, and Dio appears with hordes of his zombies. Jonathan is ready to fight, but Zeppeli steps in to defeat the power of the mask once and for all. Zeppeli clearly has the upper hand with his Hamon, but just when you think Zeppeli has landed a blow on Dio, Zeppeli's arm freezes. Dio had removed the moisture from his arm, so his arm would be able to freeze Zeppeli's arm. So now Zeppeli's arm is frozen. But thanks to Speedwagon's hot abs, his arm is warmed up in no time. Then, Dio resurrects 2 knights as zombies to fight the party. Tarkus and Bruford. They have a whole backstory, but it isn't too important. All you really need to know is that it incorporates British history, so we are using more of our setting. Jonathan takes on Bruford and his hair, and the two eventually make it underwater. Which is bad for Jonathan because his Hamon hinges on him being able to breathe. But Jonathan swims down to the bottom of the lake and sucks up some air that was trapped under some rocks. Jonathan then hits Bruford with a blast of Hamon, and Dio's hold lessens. And then Bruford gifts his own sword deemed Luck onto Jonathan, but changes the name to Pluck. Bruford giving Jonathan his sword as he dies again was a huge emotional moment for me when I first watched the series. However, in hindsight, there are a lot better moments down the line, but I still think this moment can drum up some emotions with how beautiful it is. This brave knight wishing Jonathan good pluck as he dies really highlights Jonathan's knight-like qualities. Bruford is defeated, but there is still Tarkus to deal with. Tarkus escapes to where the knights used to train and takes Jonathan into a room and chains the two of them together by the neck. Jonathan is having a hard time, and the bros don't know what to do. Poco even pisses his pants, which, trust me, was crucial to the plot. Then, Zeppeli remembers something his master Tom Petty told him. Zeppeli was destined to die, saving Jonathan in this moment, and since he was trained by Tom Petty, he won't back down even if it means his death. So after Poco opens the door to get the gang into the room, see, he did do something. Zeppeli dies while trying to take down Tarkus. But as Zeppeli's spirit travels on the stairway to heaven, his hormone enters Jonathan, giving him the power boost he needs to take out Tarkus once and for all. Zeppeli's death hits hard, but again, I know that Araki can do better from what comes later. Part 1 is definitely Araki getting his footing so that he can outdo himself later, but this part is a great basis to start from. Zeppeli's death also gives Speedwagon a cool new hat, which he needed a new one after he got rid of the Odd Job one from earlier. Where did that thing go anyway? It was cool. After Zeppeli's death, things kind of speed up. There are a lot of small henchmen that don't matter. We meet Tom Petty and his two other disciples, Dyer and Straits, and then it is on to the final confrontation with Dio. And Dio kills everyone, series over, the end. In the last fight with Dio, Dyer dies, which is not emotional at all because we just met him like 10 minutes ago. But he does teach Jonathan that the key to beating Dio is by using hormone-filled objects to get around this whole freezing thing. The fight ends with Jonathan lighting the Luck Pluck sword on fire through Dio's chest, allowing himself to not be frozen, and Dio is defeated. Surprisingly, Dio isn't dead. God damn it, I said it again. But trust me, this is a good thing, because we are about to get to one of my favorite anime endings of all time. After Dio's supposed second defeat, Arena and Jonathan get married and hop on a boat to America. But while on the boat, Dio's head in a jar being carried by his henchmen confronts Jonathan. Dio's final plan is to take Jonathan's body as his own, and Dio uses his evil eyes to blast beams at Jonathan, and it almost succeeds in killing him, but Jonathan presses on and uses one of Dio's zombies to stop a mechanism in the ship, setting the whole thing on fire. Arena finds him and decides to die along with Jonathan, but his wish is for her to live on without him. And as Arena rescues a baby, Jonathan holds the head of his adopted brother, and the two burn in the wreckage, while Arena escapes in the trunk that Dio was smuggled in, as we find out that she is pregnant with Jonathan's child. I love Jonathan's sacrifice at the end of this part, and I love the moment that him and Arena share together. I was tearing up at this part as I was rewatching it for this video. And I also love Jonathan holding Dio's head at the end. It illustrates that he never truly gave up on Dio and always saw him as a brother, no matter what he did. I adore part 1. It is in my top 3 JoJo parts of all time, but I can be alone in this assessment. There are a ton of criticisms that people like to point out about part 1, and I am ready to debunk all of them because I am part 1's biggest defender. Number 1 is that people say that part 1 is slow, which I do not get. I rewatched this part to script this video, and I went in with an open mind, ready to agree, but I don't see it. Like, if anything, the ending is rushed. Zeppeli dies, we get a bunch of henchmen, and boom, we fight Dio. Now, you could make the argument that adding all these henchmen in before we fight Dio slows the part down, but we rush through them really quickly, and heck, we don't even spend that much time on Poco and his sister. We introduce them, and we resolve it in a relatively quick amount of time. And how can you even say this part is slow when it's only 9 episodes long? What are you complaining about? Now, I might be misinterpreting this point a little bit. People saying that part 1 is slow might mean that it is slow to get to the parts that people recognize. So if you want to get to the meme gold mine that is part 3, you gotta sit through parts 1 and 2, which, fair, but parts 1 and 2 are still good, and that brings us to the second critique, which is that part 1 doesn't feel like parts 3 and beyond, which I don't really get this one either. Honestly, all of the different JoJo parts feel different to me, but they're all connected through some core elements that make it feel like JoJo's. And part 1 is no exception, even if it is more subtle about it. We got homoerotic tension with the hot Speedwagon abs. Joe bros that start as villains in this form of Speedwagon and Bruford, sharing a character's backstory right before they die with Zeppeli. Characters thinking their ways out of fights all over the place. Background characters commentating the fights. Speedwagon is the king at this. Dio rees at one point, which is practically a stand rush, and bizarre moments like Dio turning that one woman into a zombie so she would eat her own baby, and these weird things that Dio surrounds himself with. So in conclusion, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Phantom Blood is a fantastic way to start a long-running shonen series, setting up the family bloodline, some classic tropes, and putting in place a backbone that when built upon becomes nigh perfection. I am super excited to continue talking about this series, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And if you are subscribed, click the bell so you don't miss any notifications. Leave a like if you like the video. Comment, tell me what you think of part 1 and JoJo's as a whole. And with that, sayonara.